So why don't designers have more control at work? Well, it's not because we lack really great ideas. It's often because we lack power. So today we're unpacking what power really means, especially in large orgs, how it shows up in ways that you might not notice, and what you can do to navigate it more effectively as a UX professional. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome. I am super stoked to have you. You ever ship a feature that should have never seen the light of day? Survive a sprint planning where nothing got planned? Or maybe you just said, let's circle back under your breath for the 50th time this week. Well, you, my friend, have earned a Merit-ish badge. Introducing the Beyond UX Design Merit Badges, a vintage-inspired sticker series for UX designers, PMs, and engineers who have seen things. Choose from 3 sets: soft skills, sharp tongue, cult of Figma initiation, or the Pixel Pusher survival kit, and more to come soon, so stay tuned. Each set of 5 badges celebrates the chaos, the coping, and the conference calls that should have been DMs. Stick them on your laptop and flaunt them at your stand-up. Show the world you made it out of Q2 with your sanity mostly intact. Get 1 set of 5 stickers for $12 or 2 sets for $20 at beyonduxdesign.com/badges. Just promise me one thing: send pics and show me where you stick them. How often do you stare at a blank Figma canvas, unsure where to start? Well, this episode is brought to you by Mobbin, the ultimate UI and UX design inspiration library. Mobbin gives you instant access to over 400,000 beautifully designed UI and user flows from apps you love, and content is added weekly, so you never have to start from scratch again. Quickly find exactly what you need, search by app category, UI patterns, or even specific features. And my team and I use Mobbin daily at work to find useful patterns, and it helps my team work much more efficiently. And honestly, I can't imagine kicking off a new feature without Mobbin. So are you ready to level up your design process? Visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro today and never run out of inspiration again. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Roddy, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then for the love of God, tell your mom and them. So, power dynamics at work. It's often something I think a lot of UX professionals, product designers, they think about politics and they think it's like a dirty word and they don't want to deal with the politics. But if you're not dealing with it, someone's going to deal with it for you, and you're probably not going to be very happy with the outcome. And if you've read Beyond UX Design, there's a little blurb in there about power dynamics, power mapping, things like that by my good buddy Thomas Wilson. And he's going to join the show today. We're going to dig into that. I am so excited to have Thomas back on the show, twice joining a very exclusive club of Beyond UX Design two-timers. Thomas is an award-winning UX, CX, EX service designer, organizational designer, business strategy and design director. He currently provides journey management and strategic leadership in healthcare. Thomas has moved the needle at 54 startups. He's innovated and transformed clients like United Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, HCA, AIG, Experian, Amazon, Disney, NASA, and Kroger, as well as a host of tech startups, mid-markets, and Fortune 5 to 500s in enterprise AI strategy, big data, fintech, healthcare, retail, aerospace, and security. This man has done it all. Thomas has been recognized in Inc. 500 twice and has client sites that was listed in Forbes' Best of the Web. He's been written about in 5 trade-related design and communication books. His certifications include a BS in organizational psychology and leadership, an MS in instructional design and technology, Nielsen Norman Group Masters in Research and UX Management, 6 Sigma Green Belt, a service design master trainer, and Harvard Business School's Leadership and Management program. Needless to say, this man knows what he's talking about. Thomas Wilson, welcome back to Beyond UX Design, episode number 2. How is it going, man? It's so good to see you.
It's going good. That was a mouthful.
That's all right. That's what I do. That's why they pay me the big bucks, baby. Read all that stuff, first take, Someone should pay me to do this stuff. All right, so Thomas, we had you on already before once, and we got into your background a little bit, read that bio. Obviously, you know what the hell you're talking about. You've done a whole lot of stuff. But let's talk a little bit about how power dynamics works in especially large orgs, maybe even startups too, because a lot of people, it's funny, I hear people say, oh, I don't want to join a large organization. There's too much politics, as if a small startup with 5 people is not going to have power dynamics and politics.
Right. All business is politics, all business.
I love it. So let's talk a little bit about that, man. How'd you go from this idea, of being a just awesome UX professional and then realizing though, hey man, there's way more going on here than just the design part?
Well, we talked about this a little bit the last time I was here with you. I started to notice some big changes in like around 10 years ago. I started to notice that UX was kind of being pulled into more of a functional kind of almost like helper type, design donkey type land instead of being strategic. And so once I saw that kind of happening and I saw the terms leaning that way and the kind of the discourse started leaning that way, I realized, that's not where I want to go with my career. And also the more I worked in large organizations, the more I worked in for large agencies that were trying to move the needle in large organizations, the more I realized how important power and control and how that all functions in business, and how and why designers don't have control in business, and why they're perceived the way that they're perceived, and do or don't have the clout that they need to get things done and to be change agents.
Yeah, and it's funny, you think about like the way, design is taught in school, whether it's UX design, graphic design, even, communication design. We're often taught that like we are the ones who know best. We have the taste. We have the skills. Like why do people not listen to us? Why wouldn't they not listen to us? And then when we go and get the job, we're often shocked that we have very little control over our own work, and often we are being dictated to, as opposed to having influence over some of those decisions. And when I think about power, I think a lot of people think command and control. They think top-down authoritarian type power, but that's not the only type of power. When you think about power, how do you define power as it relates to, organizations and business?
I think it's the capacity to influence others and control access to valuable resources, including ideas, ideation, design, opportunities within the organization. I think it exists kind of relationally within these networks and hierarchies. And some of them are like informal, right? Like there's the stuff that happens on the surface that, everyone knows about. Then there's the stuff that's kind of really happening, you know what I mean? That's a little more nuanced. And then there's the shadow org stuff that's happening behind the scenes that most people don't get wind of until they're, involved in riff or they're caught up in something. You know what I mean? So there's those kind of 3 things. But, like I said, it kind of exists within those networks and hierarchies, not just through titles. That's one of the big misconceptions. You kind of touched on it first, is that power is dangerous or it's mean or it's bad or it's dirty, or that it's only in relation to having that legitimate power, that C-suite level or VP, you have that the hierarchy, and you have the distinction of being leadership, and that's where power comes from. And none of that is true. I mean, it's true to a certain degree, but it's not, definitive truth. So a lot of the informal like influence and things that are kind of actually being done internally by, anything from like gatekeepers to advice hubs and things like that, they shape more outcomes internally, more than most org charts would suggest or have you believe, right? And without understanding those kind of dynamics, designers and change managers and people who are trying to be, agents of change, you may be pushing ideas into systems that are structurally incapable of supporting you and them. You know what I mean? So you have to be careful about stuff like that.
I feel like there's an aspect of this understanding power dynamics. Part of it is understanding people and influence, but then there's another aspect that I think is huge, which is understanding your organization's capacity for those changes. And if you come in and say like, you could be the best influencer in the world and convince everyone all these things, but then when everyone's like, yeah, let's go do it. And then you realize, well, we don't have the time. We don't have the resources. We don't have the capacity. We don't have the capabilities. We don't have all this stuff. You kind of end up looking like a goofball. And I think a lot of you kill your trust.
I've seen it happen multiple times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like before we get into this, the reason why I wanted to have you on today is I feel like there's a lot of UX designers, product designers come into this industry. They come into this role expecting that power out of the gate, and they generally don't get it. And
they don't know how to earn it.
Exactly. And I want to talk about, before we get into this though, just the importance of understanding this and realizing that this stuff won't just come to you. You have to make it for yourself. So before we get into this, I just want to get your thoughts. Like, why is understanding this so important for designers today in business? Like, what is it that people are what's the outcome today of people not, maybe we could talk about it through that lens. The outcome that you see today of people not understanding this, what's happening and why do we need to
You're going to be marginalized. You're going to be on the outskirts and you're not going to be a player. We often hear this term, the seat at the table term, like why aren't designers invited to the seat at the table? And I want to back up just for a second because I don't think enough people talk about this little part, which is from right after 9/11 and the dot-coms all the way up until about the second year of COVID. So we're saying basically, let's just call it 2000 to 2022. For those 22 years, there were 3 rounds of ZIRP, the zero interest, just free money that was being just handed out. And what happened is a whole lot of agencies, a whole lot of design firms, transformation firms, and a whole lot of designers thought that they were kicking ass and taking names and that they were being really effectual, when what was really happening is there was just so much money on the street that all these large organizations were just buying up talent and saying, hey, we've got a UX team now. We've got a UX department. We really care about our experience. That drives stocks up, that drives, shareholder value. And so a whole lot of people existed in those 22 years that aren't as badass as they think they are. And so they basically are met with, well, right now in the last 5 years, they're seeing all of this rift and they're seeing all of this, this bloodbath of just people put on the street. And I'm telling you, this is why. It's why. Because the people who really know what they're doing are working right now. I'm not suggesting that that's going to always be the case, but the people who are good, they don't have a problem finding work right now. They've shift gears and they do different types of work. But, speaking to, considering what I just told you, designers lack formal power in business because power is typically tied to financial control. It's tied to strategic decision rights and that like hierarchical authority, right? And those areas are traditionally dominated by operations, finance, sales, executive leadership. But as you well know, the previous time I was on here, in product-driven orgs, CIOs, CPOs, and CTOs, they have a lot of power and they have the lion's share of the budget, man. So understanding that and understanding that, companies kind of operate on models that reward analytical thinking and risk mitigation, so they operate around bean counters and adapters and people who favor Newtonian math, right? For everything. And whereas design, our background, design is kind of like project based. It's a little bit more ambiguous. It's iterative, and that kind of whole flow of work that we do, it's based on lots of things: intuition, taste, decision make. The decisions around taste. It's reasonable inference. Things that are just like swarming in ambiguity that can't be quantified, right? And so, without integrating design into the actual operating model of whatever your business is, not just the product layer, designers are always going to remain on the outskirts and, marginalized, and they're going to be seen as support staff rather than like strategic leaders. And that's where we kind of find ourselves, right? As designers are being treated like design donkeys. They basically put us in the same ballpark with code warriors, with programmers, right? We're just like ditch diggers. We're design ditch diggers now. And so I don't do that work anymore. And I don't do that work because I don't feel like that's where the big pains are and the big gains are. And it's not where the juicy discovery and fun happens. Like some of the most powerful stuff that I see are all organizational changes. There's stuff that's in employee experience and customer experience and stuff that's, in that at the top, at the business layer and strategic layer, like North Star stuff, like where are we headed? Those kinds of things are to me are those are the big questions. It isn't about your design systems and your buttons and stuff, man. It just isn't.
So, well, I want to dig into this too, because like this is something I think a lot of people they come into this and
It's juicy.
yeah, dude. So we talk a little bit about the command and control types of power a bit ago. We talked about command and control, authoritarian type power, and what you're getting at just now is a lot different types of power. Like how can we take our expertise and flip the script and turn that into power on its own? But it's not the same type of power that the CEO or the CTO or the CPO has. It's a different type of power. So talk to me a little bit before we get into the other stuff about that, like the types of power,
different types of power,
and what that actually means for us and how we can start to leverage our expertise, which is somewhat ambiguous, into real power that other people can recognize.
Right. So legitimate power is kind of derived from formal roles. That's like your CEO setting your company strategy, your VPs, that kind of top down stuff, right? Referent power comes from charisma or reputation or think Steve Jobs. He was also C-suite. He was also a leader, but he was really a great salesperson. He had a lot of charisma. Think of Steve Ballmer from Microsoft, the dude who's always sweating and screaming and yelling about stuff at Microsoft. People who are kind of have that sort of angle, that's referent power. And coercive power, the dirty one, the one that we all fear, is based on like fear and punishment, and it's a legalist kind of mindset. It's about being threatened to get a demotion or being threatened to be fired for poor performance or something like that. That's coercive power. But the two that people don't really talk about enough, in my opinion, are expert power. And this is a really form of informal power. Like think in terms of like John Cutler, right? Expert power is basically it's based on knowledge and expertise. And think of someone who doesn't have a degree in their field, but is considered a pundit and has a lot of respect, and clout. And that's why I mentioned John Cutler. Like he has a big following. He's considered to be a product management guru, a product growth and evangelist kind of guru. And so because of all of that, he's considered to have that expert level power. And then the last one that you don't hear talked about a lot is reward power. Reward power are kind of those people that are the keepers of the goodies, right? They have the ability to provide rewards like promotions and bonuses or more favorable work conditions, and they hold that reward power, and they can do that altruistically or they can do it like holding it over your head, you know what I mean? But they do have that power. So understanding all of those that we just talked about, all five of those, that is going to help us navigate authority and tailor our specific types of influence strategies to each specific context and each specific type of person that holds and wields that type of power.
Yeah. And so it sounds like there's a lot of overlap too, though, right? Like you mentioned, Steve Jobs, sort of a coercive power.
Yeah, he could be two
but also,
or three of those. Yeah.
Well, obviously got legitimate power. Where do designers tend to fit? People that are in this, UX professionals, researchers, people like that.
Well, that's just it.
Do we not fit?
They can wield expert power. And if they're in the case of like, let's just say Rachel Kobetz or like Jen Cardello or somebody like that, these people have design leadership power. Okay. So they have legit power, but a lot of those types of roles have been decimated and have gone away. So when you're talking about your average like product designer, they don't have a lot of power. In fact, in large organizations, they're pretty powerless and they need to figure out where they fit in, and they need to come under the wing of someone who has that expert level power, or they need to aspire to be that, like, we keep hearing about the high level, high functioning IC, like super ICs. A super IC can helicopter into any problem, and they automatically have expert power, especially, if they're hired by the org to, hey, come solve this specific problem, or come, do some problem space, like identification and definition and sizing on a particular problem. You already have that expert level power. And the really cool thing is you can wield by focusing on short wins and quick wins. You can get some political capital and get some respect. You know what I mean? So just I would caution most designers to think about things in terms of those three horizons. Like, what is the core stuff that you need to be working on, that kicking ass and continuous improvement stuff that you need to be working on? What are those next best things that are kind of adjacent and related and what might have even bigger benefits, but might take a little bit longer and require a little bit more effort? And what are those big swinging for the fences type innovative and disruptive things that may be more longitudinal and you may have to work on for a year or two or three in order to get that stuff done? But when you do, it's a game changer and will change the business. So you need to understand how to bucket your efforts and how to ingratiate yourself to people who hold those other types of power.
Yeah. So immediately what I thought of when you're talking about some of these expert people and how their jobs have been decimated, what's interesting about this is that the expert power is only powerful if someone with legitimate power recognizes the expertise.
Acknowledges, yeah.
And acknowledges
Sees
the
you,
expertise.
sees you.
Right. Because you could have all the expertise in the world, but if the people that you work for don't appreciate that or don't see it or don't realize it, or they somehow you haven't proven your worth or proven your expertise to them, they don't actually care, and they will default to what they perceive as experts, which a lot of times I think what happens product driven orgs is, those tend to be the people with the product management experience, and stuff like that. And so it's kind of interesting, like we don't realize that. And so what I think about in that aspect of like, you've got the expertise and you've got this knowledge, it then becomes like, how do you influence those other people to show that value, to show that worth, to show that expertise, and how that expertise is useful for them and how they could leverage your expertise to get what they want. Because I think at the end of the day, a lot of this power comes down to helping people get what they want. I mean, we're all, humans tend to be selfish, right? And we all tend to act in our own best interests a lot of times. And so I'm curious your thoughts there. One of the things I want to get into in a second is some tools. Maybe this is a great way to get into that. If I am an expert, all right, I'm a designer, I've got this expertise that I know is valuable, I need to figure out how to leverage my relationships, my work, these tools. Let's talk about these tools. How do we leverage some of these tools to start to just, before we even influence, understand how to go about influencing?
There's a lot of different types of strategies. I think the most critical, like simple version of how we go about doing this, or at least starting to set the stage, is understanding stakeholder management, stakeholder mapping, and power mapping for relationship building and for command and control. Like, you need to know understand those team dynamics and power dynamics. You need to know, be able to identify the key influencers and like who's formal, who's informal, who's, and the different types of pathways to get to them, and how to rank them. And in your book, we go into that, and you actually provide a couple of, like matrices and just frameworks. But honestly, if you learn how to power map and you'll be a much better designer and change maker, because you're going to understand who controls access to the resources you need and how to build those alliances around that stuff. It includes, one of the most important things is bridging positions, by kind of like connecting otherwise like disparate or separate networks, and being kind of that cross-functional collaborator. We hear that word a lot, cross-functional. But one of the most powerful things you can be is that person that greases the wheel and unifies two different factions of people in the org that are doing similar things, but not really talking. I see this in every organization. And if you can sort of do that and wield that and manifest that into being, what that does is it increases your influence, your credibility, and your visibility. And there's also several pretty simple and practical strategies for managing power dynamics. One is, you need to learn how to push back effectively. Always, this is going to be a real shocker to some people, especially designers, but most of the metrics and the data that you see in business is metric theater. Most of it's BS. But the fact that they know how to wield that data effectively to get things done is a skill set that you sorely need as a designer. You need to be able to make those stats stand up and dance for you, because You need to use data, and you need to use data to imply the storytelling. If all you are is a so-called graphic designer and storyteller, and you're making mall maps, those goofy maps that we see that service designers used to make that look like Candyland and shit, with the pathways. When I see that stuff, it churns my stomach. But if you learn how to put data and jobs to be done, job mapping, OKRs, KPIs, if you understand how to, make sure and align certain touch points and certain moments that matter and certain critical parts of a journey or a process, but with, policy or, legal stuff. You know what I mean? If you do that, you're going to start to carry a lot more weight than somebody that's just doing these goofy graphic design mapping, and stuff that's kind of just not very valuable. But you need to be able to frame your pushback around shared goals and not personal conflict, because there's a lot of personal conflict and a lot of ebb and flow as far as, like push pull and tension that goes on. And some of it's good tension and some of it's negative and it's bad. It's toxic, but you need to know how to do that. And so there's that. The next one I would say is probably you need to know how to negotiate. And it's funny because I'm about to do this talk with Debbie at her thing about negotiation and some other things, but pretty much the majority of the talk is about negotiating. And you need to focus on interests, not positions. You need to focus on, what people's goals are. You need to know how people get compensated and what their bonuses are based on. Because if their bonus is based on something that's counterintuitive to what you're doing, you better believe they're gonna try to wreck your program real quick. If you're all about exposing some number that they're hiding behind, you need to be really careful, because that happens a lot. And we walk right into those kinds of sucker punches all day long, every day in business. But you need to use principled negotiation techniques like BATNA or anchoring or mutual gains, stuff like that. The BATNA just stands for like best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And it basically just means kind of like the back pocket deal. You know what I mean? Like it's your plan B. It's, if I don't get X from this deal, I'm gonna walk away. But if I get better than X, I know that I'm good. You just need to know, these kinds of strategies, and givers gain. You need to understand, like reciprocity. You need to demonstrate value. You need to translate all your design impact into business metrics, customer retention rates, NPS, time to market, all the stuff that businesses use. It doesn't matter if we don't like NPS or CSAT scores, or if we don't really like some of these types of things. The business loves them. So figure out how to play ball, and figure out, what they appreciate, how they measure success, and go get in there and get your hands dirty. You also need to be able to communicate across hierarchies. You need to be able to tailor all your messaging to each level. So I have a share out deck that goes to my stakeholders, right? And that might have 80 slides in it or something. You know what I mean? It have tons of stuff in it. Then I have another one that's for people a little bit higher up, and that might have 40 slides in it. And then I might have an executive summary that just talks about the big wins and what we broadly did. And that might have 15 to 20 slides in it at the most. And so you need to learn how to tailor your message in your presentation to who the audience is. Executives just need outcome oriented stories. Your peers need to be able to collaborate clearly, and they need marching orders, SLAs, service enhancements. They need to know how the rubber meets the road. So the folks lower down, if you're doing discovery and you're doing work, you need to be able to tell them how to get this operationalized, how to get the changes made. If you're providing old school stuff like PRDs and things like that, or if you're doing something more progressive, whatever it is that your company is doing, that's how you introduce new things, and that's how you innovate. You figure out what is. We talked about this online. What is current? What is actively happening in your company? Because if you go in there, like you said, trying to swing a big innovation stick and trying to be like, look at me, I know best, and I'm smart, and you guys are all dumb for doing this old school safe stuff. If you kind of do all of that sort of thing, you're good. Your ship is going to be like sunk and dead in the water as soon as you set sail. So you have to think about what's current, how do I fit in and get in? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. I have two more. So I think we need to be able to use influence tools. Like you need to be able to leverage different relationships. You need to understand reciprocity, that givers gain thing I was just talking about, and you need to be able to exert soft power, kind power, power that's rooted in love and understanding. And I think the last one, and you're going to laugh, is not too many people across the country and definitely across the world don't know this, but you definitely do. In New Orleans, the French have a saying called lagniappe. A lagniappe is a little something extra. If you're going to get ice cream, you get an extra scoop. If you're going to get a piece of chicken, you get an extra piece of chicken. Lagniappe is that little something extra. If you're supposed to be working 30 hours on a project, work 40 and don't bill for the 10. If you're supposed to be doing something for someone, go the extra mile and take on a little bit more, not more than you can handle, but more than you said you would, and try to help and really bring it home or get it across the finish line. That's an old school thing that sales folks and people in the South know about, and that's lagniappe. You know what I mean? A
Yeah.
little sweetener, something on top. You know what I mean? That makes it makes it good. So designers who understand all of that and understand power, they're not just creators. They're catalysts for change. They're catalysts for business augmentation. So, applying these kind of like, a systems thinking lens and, understanding like that political capital stuff that you and I were talking about, and coalition building, creating coalitions of the willing and things like that. And creating awareness of the power and doing the stuff like we talked about, stakeholder management, stakeholder mapping and power mapping. If you do that, you're going to move from the periphery to the center of organizational transformation. And once you get inside the org like that, it's like Donkey Kong, man. There's a lot of visibility, and you're going to be a player, and you're going to get a lot of respect, especially if you're making big changes.
I want to talk a little bit more about like power mapping specifically. And I know you mentioned it in the Beyond UX Design book, tiny little blurb. We talk a lot. I have a whole chapter about stakeholder management in there. So hopefully people are a little bit more familiar with stakeholder management. I don't think many people are familiar with the idea of power mapping. So talk a little bit about what is power mapping? How do people start doing it? Because we just said, before you go in swinging, trying to change things, you've got to understand who the right people are, how to talk to them, what they care about. You mentioned the idea about, bonuses and things tied to the stuff that's going against their bonus. They're going to shoot it down. So thinking about that, the power mapping, what does power mapping look like? And how do we start doing that? And starting there.
We should probably do a session or, like upload some stuff. But to describe it, think of like a cell and how a cell works, or think about the concentrical, the circles of like a stakeholder, like a bullseye, right? Like you have a bullseye and you have circles, right? And you have those people in the middle that are part of the core team. You have the people outside of that who are, need to they're part of the decision making process, but they're not necessarily involved in the day to day. And then you've got the folks on the outskirts of that are informed. And then you have the people further out that are just kind of like, they need to know and they need to come to share outs, but they're not really involved much in the project. But, the stuff that you're doing will affect them in some way and they need to care about it. So once you understand those types of things and you understand just kind of like how a nervous system works, or how like a force directed graph, like a dandelion, right? So you have these centers where, you might have the perception will be to people who've never done this, is that, again, what we were initially talking about, that the power lies with the C-suite. It's, your chief whatever officer has the most power. And they do have the budget power. They do have the voice of the business that they're maintaining, the strategy of the business. But oftentimes, remember the different types of power that we talked about. We talked about that informal stuff. We talked about, expert power. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have clout. You don't have to have a big degree. You don't have to have the big C-suite title or even a VP title. But if you have the knowledge and you have the or you control, you're the hand of the king, or queen, and you're the consigliere. A lot of times the people that hold the most power are those people that are like admins or people that support those people. And so I'm working on a project right now, and there's a young lady, and she like, is under the C-suite of the sales folks, and she has all of the power to know how to send out these emails, to do all of the stuff that we need to get done. And it's just kind of like, you would never believe that someone, at that level is your go-to person that knows everything, knows everyone. If you're having issues over here or issues over there, she's going to steer you in the right direction. But when you map these things out and you color code them with some taxonomy based on, you can do it green, red. You can do it just like, like a SCADA, you know what I mean? Like you can do red for like hot, like someone who may not be interested in what you're doing versus someone who's a real contributor and someone who's going to help you be an enabler, and you might label them green or varying shades of green or blue. Like use color coding, use the size of your circles. You can also do it in a map if you prefer, but I don't like hierarchies because they tend to stem off and have, big circles have smaller little circles, and those circles have smaller circles. And so it ends up looking like more of like a force directed graph, right? And so you click on something and the rest of them collapse into it. And I've done them with like D3 visualizations before, but the coolest ones are ones that you just whip up in Miro and you just whip up in a whiteboard program. But the whole idea is understand who's got the power and the influence, understand who influences those people. And when you do that and you kind of give them some weight, you'll start to get this picture of this ecosystem of power. And you'll start to really understand, like, who do I need to be talking to? Because it isn't always that person that's inaccessible and difficult to get a hold of. Sometimes it's a person that's, going to respond in 5 seconds. And that makes life a lot easier if you know that. If you don't, you could spin your wheels for weeks, trying to figure out what to do. And so we do that kind of mapping in secret. And you and I talked about that before. And we talked about kind of making private personas, like a sort of, just like a profile of each one of these people, right? Because you need to know what they care about. Do they have kids? Are they a family man or woman? Do they, are they deeply religious? Do they have like some deeply religious types of views and values? If they're political, are they like very political and outspoken about, the left or the right or whatever? If you put all those things into a sort of profile or a card, kind of like a persona, then you're going to know how to communicate with people. If I'm about to get on the horn with somebody and I know they went to, UT, but they're in California now, or I know they went to LSU and they're up in New York now. You can have a conversation about those types of things. Maybe you're both, we're in the Boy Scouts. Maybe you both, have certain types of views. Those little identifiers and things like that can go a long way with having deep and meaningful conversations. And this might sound contrived and a little bit, I don't know, manipulative, but everything in business is, you know what I mean? If you think salespeople aren't keeping notes like this in their CRMs, you're stupid. They're keeping, they know the names of your kids. They know your wife's birthday. They know your anniversary. You know what I mean? They know this stuff because they want to be able to have not just conversation starters, but they want to be able to be friendly and say, hey, I remember that thing that's important to you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and this is something I think I'd say this a lot with, stakeholder mapping, like just the act of thinking about it. Even if you don't do anything with it, you're already further along than like 80% of most teams who just assume the work will speak for itself. And it never speaks for itself. And I love this idea of taking stakeholder maps, power maps, the profiles, the notes. And these are also like really great onboarding tools for like new people who join the team to come on and say, look, this is the intel we've gathered by everybody. This is how we influence, and having an actual process for going about change management, right? Creating change is not just going to happen because you will it. It's going to happen because you've made an effort and you've thought about it and you've put the effort into, understanding how people communicate. I use this example a lot. Back when I was at GE, right after COVID, we got word that they were going to scrap this project that we were on for like 4 years. It was like huge, tons of money and everything. And this entire product team, dude, I'm not kidding, 2 weeks putting together a deck and a presentation to try to influence
about the value of it.
Yeah, to try to influence this executive. And they had already made a decision and they couldn't care less because they cared way more about
some new thing. They
some
had a new
other
project.
thing. I don't want to get too deep into it, but it was like nothing we could have said would have changed their mind. And it was just a giant waste of everyone's time. And, in that case, like, like in that instance, right? Like find something else to care about, find another thing to get on. Like, how do you speak to the thing that they care about? It probably won't be on this specific project. That project is dead. You're done. Don't even bother. Find something else to influence them. And so anyway, that was just like an experience that I use all the time. The other thing that I love is this is again something that I learned when I was at GE. You've got all these executives and they oftentimes share an executive assistant that helps like schedule their time. They know what their schedules look like, and if you make friends with that person, guess who's going to slide in their schedule before somebody else does? It's going to be you. Right. And so, these are people often that are just disregarded completely, dismissed because they are just assistants. They're not even secretaries. They're literally just people who like organize emails and schedule stuff. But those are the people who, when you've got a meeting, they're going to know what they like to eat. They're going to know what kind of food they, like dietary. So when you go into this meeting, you've already got a step ahead because you've got that little bit of intel. I love that. And that's something I think like just there's so much hubris, I think, on in large orgs where we just dismiss those people as insignificant and, not important. And they aren't.
You have to humble yourself, Jeremy. You have to humble yourself. That's where the power comes from, my friend. It doesn't come from being haughty. It doesn't come from sticking your chest out. It doesn't come from like rattling off your accolades, even though we do that at the beginning of podcasts. It doesn't come from, hey, do you know who I am? And the fact that I have 30 years of experience and I work for who's who and what's what. It's not about any of that. It's about getting small. It's about when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And I think, going back to like the artifact itself, I think in your book, right around the same place where this chapter is where I'm talking, you have like a influence and interest matrix, and you have the supporters, the champions, the bystanders, and the challengers in that kind of matrix. You know what I mean? Up and out are the champions. And so if you put people in those in the right, quadrant, and and you just sort of define who's who and what's what and what they're how their meaning to you and to the project, and you do some of the things that we discussed, I think you're going to be better than good. You're going to be better than not. And you're going to be really surprised at how powerful, pun intended, it really is to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's a game changer, man. And I still like, it blows my mind when I hear designers say the work will speak for itself. You don't have to get into politics. You should be above the politics. It absolutely blows my mind. Something I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something you and I were speaking not long ago. We were coming up with ideas for the show, and something that you mentioned that I had never even considered was the generational divisions and the differences between Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y, like all these people that are together, millennials, trying to push a project forward. The way that they communicate, the things that they care about, often, we don't always want to generalize because everybody in a generation is obviously not exactly the same. But there's often trends enough for us to, call them generations and have these ideas, these high-level ideas. I would talk to me a little bit about this idea of generational dynamics in the workplace and how does this fit into that overall idea of power and how power manifests.
Right. I think one of the things that's really important to think about with regard to the generational stuff is, we basically overlook the need for different dynamics and to have different types of influence. This is all part of team science. Team science is something you should like look into and geek out on. But what happens a lot, especially in these stodgy old legacy kind of orgs, is you get a whole lot of sameness. We're talking a lot about bias. You post a lot about biases, and you have those cards and posters and stuff that you do. And a lot of people don't really realize that when you have a design team and it's a bunch of middle-aged white males that are all from roughly the same type of background and same education, that's not diversity of thought. You don't just have diversity as far as demographics. We have diversity as far as psychographics and as far as like mental models and different types of thinking. I know some people don't like the term mental model, but basically we just mean different types of neurodiversity, right? You need to have different types of people, and understanding the generational things, like they have varying norms and they have different types of communication, different types of the preferred leadership, and they have different types of conflict, right? Like an example might be that boomers, they prefer like hierarchical feedback structures. They prefer hierarchies, right? And they prefer email, right? Traditional email. Or if you talk on the phone, they want to talk on the phone, not text on the phone. Whereas like your average Gen Zer, doesn't do email. They think email's passe. They want to communicate via an instant messenger or via text, like something like Slack, Teams, whatever, like those different, there's a bunch of them like Signal and all those things. I don't use any of those, but like they prefer that sort of stuff, and they prefer, they don't like hierarchies. They like flat. They like everything to kind of be collectivist and sort of a lot of group think, and they like flat orgs and things like that. They don't like traditional hierarchy. And so misalignment can lead to a lot of friction, and but also if you put these people together and there's a mutual respect and we kind of seek to understand, not be understood, and we seek to understand one another, you can bridge generational gaps by sharing and like understanding and listening, using inclusive language. Like when you say things like, well, back in my day, or, what I mean, you wouldn't know that happened 35 years ago and you weren't even born yet. You can't talk like that. And when you do stuff like that, you're alienating people and you're pushing people away and outside of that circle. And the thing is you want everyone internal. You want everyone inside that circle, and you want to be more inclusive, because when people are in these, when they're we say this word a lot, when people are in environments of psychological safety, they do better work. They're happier at work, they're more productive, they thrive. And so we just want to make sure that we understand that. And not to plug something of mine, but I actually wrote a really good like generational understanding generations in the workplace article on my LinkedIn. Like there's a really good article on it. I spent a lot of time on that article. You should go check it out. It has tons of data, has tons of like the preferred communication and how they make decisions and what they expect compensation wise. It's got a lot of information in it.
I love that, dude. I'm making a note right now to include that in the show notes. But yeah, that's yeah. Feel free to promote any of your stuff, because one of the things I want to, before we get out of here, I wanted to ask if you had any resources where people can learn about these things. And I keep going back to this idea, and I say this as relates to software, but I think more broadly, just experiences, or really just like change management. It doesn't happen without great relationships, and if you don't understand the other people, and you talked about lagniappe and giving a little bit extra, going above and beyond, doing things for other people, not because you want something in return, but because it's the right thing to do, people will reciprocate. But you can't expect it, right? Obviously. But relationships, it is just the critical linchpin for like getting anything done. And, you mentioned New Orleans. This is funny. My dad, growing up in New Orleans when I graduated high school, the like advice he gave me, and I think I mentioned this in my book, but the best advice he ever gave me was, if you want to get something done, you take someone to lunch, and you go to lunch, like, face to face, coffee, whatever, share a meal with somebody, have an honest conversation, get to know them on a personal level. And then that just makes hard conversations that much easier when you have mutual respect across the board. And then negotiating becomes easier. You're not worried about being taken advantage of. People, you can trust them on the other side, even if you don't align 100%, they're not there to take advantage of you. And so, this is just like, to me, it's just so important, man. Relationships.
Your dad sounds like a cool guy. And the thing is, all of the stuff that we're talking about, it's not manipulative. It's not even on the level of, these are not the droids you're looking for. You're not trying to influence or brainwash anybody. You're just trying to play the field. You're trying to play to win. And the thing is a lot of this stuff is just built in just acknowledging and having character. And it's about understanding, like, there's a way to communicate, there's a way to get things done, there's a way to help one another, and there's a way to be totally ineffectual and not be good. It doesn't matter how kick-ass your portfolio is or how much experience you have, if you can't drop into an organization and wield some type of influence and power and can't get anything done. Because if you piss people off, they will just straight up block you, man. They'll block you. They'll put you in a padded room. They'll ignore you. They will just, if they want to put you on ice, they will. And I see that happen all the time. I have a quick story if we have 1 minute.
Yeah, good.
So I was working on a really big project last year, and this is going to happen to everyone, especially designers. It's going to happen to you if you're a researcher, if you're a designer, and if you're a woman. This is going to happen to you a lot. If you're a creative male or a woman, this is going to happen to you. Where someone's going to be a jerk to you. They're going to be disrespectful. They're going to be mean. They're going to step on you. They're going to be some kind of abusive or discounting. They're going to devalue you in some way, and some kind of demeaning way. If you try to reciprocate that, if you battle that, if you stoop down to their level and you get down in the weeds and you start to fight with them and haggle with them and get them back and all that kind of stuff, trust me, that never wins. You're not going to get anything out of it. And it's highly likely that if they've been there for longer than you and they have more power than you, you're going to get fired. You're going to get fired, even though the other person was definitely the instigator and the asshole. So don't do it. And I'm going to give you an example. I started this project, and this guy started this project. He was a vendor. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds about the details, but he was just kind of cold blooded to me and this other BA. He was really disrespectful. He was just kind of dismissing our workshops and dismissing some of the stuff that we were doing. And this happens a lot, because the world got really cold in the last 5 years, and people don't like cupcake emojis and strawberry emojis and colorful stickies and talking about empathy and dignity. And you know what I mean? Well, you start doing stuff like that around the wrong people, and they're going to just dog you. They're going to run you off too in a lot of orgs. So we were just kind of, we were feeling it from this person, and he wanted us to know how important and powerful he was. And apparently he was doing that with other people. And I just shut it down. I just said, I'm not going to invite this person to any more of my meetings. He can come to my share outs and do whatever he wants, but I'm not going to bring him as a contributor to any of these workshops. And we're just not going to do it. And I had a private conversation with someone else who was above him, and, and I said, look, this is kind of weird. And he's doing this to these other two women, and they're not speaking up about it, but I'm definitely going to speak up and just tell you that this is not okay. And this is what I'm going to do about it. Is that okay? And they said, no problem, do it. And 6 months later, 4 months later, they put him on ice. He's riding out the remainder of his contract. He has zero power, zero influence, and he's been replaced by somebody else. And it's come to fruition and to everybody's, understanding that he's kind of this jerk doing this stuff. And you know what I mean? It's just, had I played that another way, had I been 25 or 30 years old and been like, "Hey, buddy, let me tell you something about you that you don't know." If I tried to get him back, or like haggle with that person, and I do things like in private. If somebody pisses me off, I'll pick up the phone and I'll be like, "Hey, what's going on? Did I misunderstand you? Because it seemed like you were a little short with me, and I didn't really understand, where that was coming from. Did I step on your toes? Did I do something inadvertently, or did I sound cocky or arrogant or something? Like, what happened to make you talk to me like that?" You know what I mean? And usually, if the person's cool or smart, they're gonna go, "Well, you kind of did this, or you didn't invite me to X meeting." They're gonna tell you the truth. The truth. The only time someone says, "Oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're wrong. You're crazy," is if the person's batshit crazy. If they're, what I mean? If they're just so toxic and negative that that's how they get down and that's their modus operandi, and they're going to try to vindictively do something to you. And that does happen, but it doesn't happen to me often.
Yeah, you might even realize like someone's like, man, I just had a really bad day. I
Yeah.
had my
Or they
kids were
might level
just
with you and just say, "I'm going through some stuff. I'm sick. I'm sick. My kid's acting
yeah,
crazy."
yeah,
That's usually what happens.
exactly. And I think like we often, I hate to say assume positive intent, because there are a lot of people out there that are, misogynist,
That are
sexist,
negative and
racist,
shitty.
whatever, right? There's tons of people like that. And I hate to say everybody is, but at least approach it like that and try. Like, I love your example though, like reaching out just on the side. Hey man, I noticed you did this thing, or I did whatever. And what it just, can we talk about it, And you might get someone who's like a narcissist, just, gaslighting you. Oh, it didn't happen, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, I think most people would probably level with it. They'd appreciate the honesty and the openness.
They're gonna level with you, especially if it's in private. If people feel like if they feel shamed, or they feel humiliated, or they feel like, they just look like a fool or something in front of others, that's when people get their feelings hurt and they lash out. But if you do stuff like that and you didn't mean to do it, you need to acknowledge that and be like, "You know what? I didn't even know that. And I'm sorry had that perception. I promise I wasn't trying to send those vibes your way at all. So if I sounded like that, it's maybe I was just being careless, or you know what I mean? I was being a little loose with my words, but trust me, I don't feel like that about you, and that's not true. What the thing that you're thinking, that's I don't feel like that." So I tell the truth, and I just am honest about it, and I expect forgiveness, because I'm willing to give it. I'm willing to give forgiveness and forgive and forget, and so I don't hold grudges. You know what I mean? And I had a lot to hold grudges about for many years, and I don't. And so I want to be forgiven, and I want to be acknowledged as someone who cares and someone who's trying to do the right thing. So I try to do that with others.
I love it, dude. All right, man. So we've had you for a little while now. I got some this or that questions to get everybody out there to know you a little bit better. Before we do that, though, any resources, anything that you want to give a shout out, even if it's stuff you've done, shout out to anything that can help people understand power and how to map and all those things a little bit better to be more
There's a
effective.
great book called Power for All, and there's another one, Power for All and 7 Rules of Power. That's a good one. Understanding Organizations, that's a great book. Power for All is by Julie Batalana, and I love that book. There's one more book I wanted to tell you. The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul, and How Minds Change, and Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy. So all of those books that I just mentioned are excellent books about power and about navigating strategy inside of businesses and stuff like that. And I would suggest lots of people, if you can afford to do this right now, right? Let's just say you're out of work or you're struggling, or you're like, you've been a UXer for the last 20 years and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do this anymore. Go into organizational design and organizational leadership. Take these classes. You can get them from some of these 4-tiered schools. They're accredited. You can go to these classes for $800 to $1,000 a piece, as opposed to going to some Ivy League school for $4,000 a class. And you can get a decent education, and they'll be using the same books, the most popular books, and the same curriculum. You just won't have access to the same groups and the different stuff outside of your education. Like, when you go to Harvard to be in the groups and to get access to all of the different stuff. But if you don't want that, go take some of these classes and you can get certificates from really good schools where you just take 4 courses on leadership and strategy and organizational design and management and understanding power. There's lots of these courses everywhere. So
I love it, dude. All right. Awesome, man. Well, we'll include all that stuff in the show notes as well. And I think this stuff, again, like I said, man, it's so important. You can't ignore it. And the work's not going to speak for itself. If you don't understand how these dynamics at work play out, you're just going to be left behind every single time. So, Thomas, awesome conversation. Thank you so much. All right. I've got 20 ridiculously silly this or that questions to ask you to help everybody listening get to know you a little bit better. Last time you were here, we asked you some questions about your favorite books and podcasts and meals and all that stuff. This time, we're going to understand you a little bit better, figure out how Thomas ticks. You ready? First thing that comes to your mind, you don't have to think too hard about it. First up, dog or cat?
dog.
All right, Netflix or YouTube?
YouTube.
All right, go down that rabbit hole. All right, phone call or text? Date yourself a little bit here.
Probably text, believe it or not.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I'm. It all depends who you are. If you want
It depends on who the conversation is with.
That's right.
If it's
All
your
right.
granddad, then you want a phone call.
Course.
If it's, the next door neighbor, just text me.
Yeah, text me, man. All right. This one's really important. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Oh man, which season of Star Trek?
Just all of them.
The entire ecosystem.
The universe. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go with Star Trek.
I'm with you, dude. I love it, man. I used to say, I used to be very clear, like answering Star Trek because all the world building and how deep it got with all the episodes and stuff.
Next Generation.
Oh, dude, I know. You gotta love it, man.
Was awesome.
But now that Star Wars has all the shows and stuff, they're doing a lot more of that world building and character building, which, goes way beyond the
Disney
movies. Yeah. So anyway, I haven't gotten into all the Star Wars, but I haven't even gotten into like all the newer Star Trek series like Picard. I haven't finished that and Discovery and all that. But anyway, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. All right. High tech or low tech? If you could pick one.
It depends on what we're talking about. I'm starting to feel like I'm regressing to low tech when it comes to things like Netflix. Like I hate streaming now. I hate getting on my mobile phone. I feel like mobile's broken. So I might be regressing to low tech, actually.
Don't tell anybody. Dude. I would love to figure out how I can go off grid in the mountains somewhere.
Seriously,
live
in the jungles, grow your own
phone.
food.
That's it, dude. I'm with you, man. All right, big party or small gathering?
Small gathering.
All right, when you're sleeping, fan or no fan?
No fan.
No fan. All right.
Feels like bugs are crawling all over me. I can't stand the sound. I don't like things touching me when I sleep. Yeah, no fan. Just crank the AC real low.
There you go.
The AC needs to be at 68 degures.
Some peace and quiet. I love the noise. Like the fan. I can't sleep if it's like totally silent in my room.
My wife's the same way.
Yeah. What do y'all do? I guess you stick the earplugs in or something because the wife always wins. All right. Mountains or beach?
Probably beach. I'm afraid of bears, man.
Oh, yeah, bear. We gotcha. See, if you go up, was it Pacific Northwest? I don't think they have any bears up there. They just got.
They got badgers. They got something.
They got something.
They got something I don't want to mess with.
There you go. Well, the beach, you got sharks, stingrays and stuff.
Yeah, I don't go that deep. I don't go that deep.
Just hang out in the sand. I'm with you. All right. Let's see. Football or basketball?
Basketball by far.
All right. Now we got some really stupid, silly questions. Would you rather a burrito blanket or pizza slippers?
Burrito blanket.
Burrito blanket. All right. Would you rather always sneeze confetti or fart out bubbles?
Farting bubbles.
Either way, someone's like, whoa, what's going on over there, Tom? You all right, man? All right. Would you rather speak only in rhyming verse or communicate only in emojis, but you had to say the emoji,
Rhyming verse.
Rhyming verse? That'd be fun. I think that'd be great. Would you always wear a cape if you had to wear either a cape or a monocle wherever you went for the rest of your life?
Cape.
All right. Would you rather, this one is really funny, be a reverse centaur, so a horse head with a human body, or a reverse mermaid, which is a fish head with human legs?
I'm going to go with the reverse centaur.
I feel like fish, I don't know, because I feel like
I can't tell which one of those would smell worse.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. Would you rather, these are some design related ones. Would you rather have your designs critiqued by Gordon Ramsay or Simon Cowell when they're both in a bad mood?
Simon Cowell.
All right. Would you rather only be able to conduct research through interpretive dance or through haiku poems?
Haiku poems.
Yeah. Now this one, I've had a lot of people, I've asked this one to everybody, and they get the questions like, so, I don't know, we have to figure this one out, but are you only able to communicate to the users in haiku poems or interpretive dance, or do they answer the question? I need to flesh this one out a little bit better. Can they only answer in interpretive dance or haiku poem, or is it both?
I think my friend Adam St. John Lawrence from the service design community, I think he would probably prefer the interpretive dance, but I'm going to go with the haiku poems, communication back and forth in poems.
Yeah, I love that. It's just, I don't know. I imagine like a user session or a research session where you're just like back and forth haikus the entire time.
I would totally talk like Dr. Seuss, man, or like Shel Silverstein, or like Eminem.
Oh, it'd be so much fun. If you do that, record it for me, please. Post that online. All right, last one. Would you rather have all of your user interfaces audibly narrated by Gilbert Gottfried or Fran Drescher as the nanny?
Ooh, I can't stand Fran Drescher's voice, man. It would have to be Gilbert Gottfried because he's actually kind of funny.
Yeah. All right. I love it. So that's, it's accessible, but you still have to have, Gilbert Gottfried narrate that time. All right, Thomas, that is it, man. That is all the questions that I've got for you today. Before we get out of here, give yourself a plug. Let everybody know where they can find you, get all your readings or your writings and all that stuff.
Find me on LinkedIn. I'm not selling anything but hope. I want you to know that the world is not ending. AI is not killing everyone, and you can find and experience work and joy, and you can change, but you need to want to do it, and you need to apply yourself. You can find me on LinkedIn. I write a lot of crazy posts. I talk a lot of smack, and I also write articles every now and then that are pretty worthwhile. It's all free.
I love it. All free. I love it. And I will confirm 10 out of 10 would recommend follow Mr. Thomas Wilson. All right, Thomas, this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Thomas and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on how power shapes your influence and how you can navigate those organizational dynamics effectively. Power is an interesting thing, and if you understand how power works, you can wield it to your advantage. Just remember, don't be evil. But how do you deal with organizations and power associated with them at work? Have you figured out how to master those things and wield them to your advantage? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. And if you listened all the way until now, you've definitely earned a Merit-ish badge. Whether you survive tricky team dynamics, Figma fiascos, or pixel-perfect feedback loops, There's a badge with your name on it. Grab 2 sets for $20 at beyonduxdesign.com/badges. Just promise me one thing. You'll show me where you stick 'em. And if you're tired of staring at a blank Figma canvas, Mobbin gives you access to over 400,000 beautifully designed UI screens and user flows with a library that grows bigger every week. Kickstart your creativity, streamline your workflow, and level up your design process. Visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro and never run out of inspiration again. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. We did a picnic for Mother's Day. It was like beautiful outside. It wasn't too hot. I wasn't thinking about sunscreen, and then end up with this killer Farmer's Day.
Dang.